I bought my parents a $425,000 seaside mansion for their 50th anniversary, but when I arrived, my mother was crying and my father was shaking. My sister's family had taken over, and her husband pointed at the door, shouting, "This is my house. Get out." My brother-in-law was pointing at the door of a house I owned when I decided the situation had gone on long enough, not when I pulled into the driveway and noticed the strange truck in the spot where my parents' Buick should have been, not when I saw the moving boxes stacked against the porch railing, my porch railing, on a house whose deed had my name on it in clean black ink, not even when I walked through the front door and found my mother crying into a dish towel at the kitchen table while my father stood 3 feet away, trembling so badly his glasses had slid halfway down his nose. It was when Craig Dalton, 240 pounds of borrowed confidence in a moisture-wicking polo shirt, turned from the window, pointed at the open front door behind me, and said, with the absolute certainty of a man who has never once been seriously challenged in his life, "This is my house now. Get out." The ocean was visible through the living room window behind him. $11 million worth of coastline that I had specifically chosen because my parents deserved to wake up to something beautiful after 50 years of waking up before the sun. I closed the front door behind me, turned the deadbolt, looked at Craig. "Interesting," I said. "Tell me again whose house this is." I should back up, because the story that got us to that moment started not with Craig, and not entirely with my sister Vanessa, but with a Tuesday morning in March about 4 years ago, when I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of a tech campus in San Jose, and I called my mother to wish her happy birthday, and she cried for 7 minutes before she told me why. My name is Ethan Whitaker. I am 38 years old. I run a software analytics company that I founded with 2 other people in a 2-bedroom apartment in 2013, and which was acquired 9 years later for a number that made me briefly famous in certain trade publications and permanently altered the shape of my life in ways I am still, honestly, adjusting to. I am telling you this not to establish wealth as a credential, but because it is relevant context for everything that follows. Money, I have learned, does not complicate families. It clarifies them. It takes the tensions and tendencies that were always there and removes every excuse for pretending otherwise. My parents, George and Helen Whitaker, are the kind of people who will never fully understand what I do for work, and who raised me in a way that made that entirely irrelevant. My father spent 31 years as a machinist at a plant in coastal Virginia that closed in 2009, and my mother spent those same years alternating between part-time bookkeeping work and full-time management of a household that ran on careful budgeting and the specific ingenuity of people who know how to make things last. They own a 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood that peaked in the 1980s, and they have lived in it for 41 years, and they have never once complained about it in my presence, because complaining was not part of the vocabulary they used in front of their children. What they also never said, in front of their children or otherwise, was that the house had a leaking roof they'd patched twice and couldn't afford to properly repair, that my father's knees had gotten bad enough that the stairs were a genuine daily problem, that my mother had stopped mentioning the arthritis in her hands because mentioning it had never changed anything, and she preferred not to spend her energy on things she couldn't change. I found all of this out on my mother's 68th birthday, in that parking garage, when she cried for 7 minutes and then apologized for crying and then told me it had just been a hard winter. I sat in that car for a long time after we hung up. Then I called my real estate attorney. Vanessa Whitaker Dalton is 4 years older than me, and I want to be precise about this, because precision is the only way to tell this particular story fairly. She was not always the person she became. There was a version of my sister, when we were children, who would share her Halloween candy without being asked, and who sat with me through 2 hours of a thunderstorm when I was 7 years old, because I was afraid, and she had decided, without announcement, to not be somewhere else. That person existed. I want to say that clearly. Somewhere in the decade of her marriage to Craig Dalton, that person had become very hard to find. Craig sold commercial insurance, or had until 8 months before the day he pointed at my door and told me to leave. He had a way of occupying space that I can only describe as presumptive. He moved through rooms as if they had been expecting him, as if his arrival was the relevant event and everything prior was simply preparation. He told long stories that were really just extended performances of his own competence, and he laughed at jokes before he'd finished telling them, which is a specific quality I find difficult to be charitable about. He and Vanessa had 2 boys, 9 and 11, who were by all accounts good kids navigating the particular challenge of being raised by people whose relationship to money was transactional and whose relationship to accountability was essentially non-existent. I did not dislike Craig because he was loud, or because he laughed too much, or because he had a habit of calling my parents' home the old place, in a tone that managed to be simultaneously affectionate and dismissive. I disliked Craig because I had watched, over for 11 years the effect he had on my sister. The woman who sat with me through the thunderstorm now laughed at things that weren't funny and went quiet when she should have spoken and had gradually, almost imperceptibly, outsourced her judgment to a man whose judgment was not worth the outsourcing. But I am getting ahead of myself. My parents found the house in April. Not found. I found it with a buyer's agent named Sandra Okonkwo, who had 20 years in coastal Virginia real estate and who understood exactly what I was looking for without requiring me to explain it twice. 3 bedrooms on the ground floor, which mattered for my father's needs. A kitchen with a south-facing window that would give my mother morning light while she cooked. A back porch that faced the water and had enough space for my father's rocking chairs and enough quiet for the both of them to sit in together without feeling they had to fill the silence. $425,000 and worth every cent of it. I put the deeds solely in my name, with a formal occupancy agreement prepared by my attorney, Jonathan Marsh of Marsh Property Law, 16 years in residential real estate, offices in the glass building on Granby Street, that established my parents as permanent occupants with specified rights and protections. Jonathan had suggested this structure. It protects them, he told me, and it protects the asset from any third-party claims. I thought he was being procedurally thorough. He was being prophetically thorough. I also had a home security system installed before my parents moved in, a ring system with 8 cameras covering every exterior angle and all primary interior access points, with cloud backup and a mobile app that I could access from anywhere in the country. The installer, a young man named Devante who finished 2 hours ahead of schedule, showed me how to read the access logs. I thanked him and filed the information away. I did not believe when I installed that system that I would ever actually need the access logs. My parents moved in on a Saturday in June. I was there for the weekend. We ate takeout crab from paper boxes on the back porch and watched the sun go down over the water, and my mother cried. The good kind this time. And my father put his arm around her and looked at the ocean with the expression of a man confronting something he had not allowed himself to want. It was the best 2 days of my year. I drove back to Virginia Beach on Monday morning. My flight to San Jose was at noon. The first sign came 2 weeks later, and I told myself it was nothing. My mother called on a Sunday afternoon, which was normal, but the call was shorter than usual, which wasn't. She said things were fine. She said the garden beds I'd had installed along the south wall were coming in nicely. She said Vanessa and Craig had stopped by on Saturday with the boys. I said that was nice. She said yes, it was. There was a quality to the call I couldn't quite name, a slight compression, as if she was speaking in a smaller space than usual, choosing words with more care than a conversation about garden beds should require. I told myself she was tired. 3 weeks after that, I called my father on a Thursday evening and got no answer. He almost always answered. He had his phone in his shirt pocket from 7 in the morning until 9 at night, with the religious consistency of a man who considers missed calls a form of rudeness. I texted. No response for 3 hours, which had genuinely never happened before. When he called back at 9:47 p.m., he said he'd been outside. His voice was the right words in the slightly wrong order, the way speech sounds when a person is managing something while talking. I told myself he was adjusting to the new routine. The third sign I missed entirely, until I saw the security footage later. On a Wednesday in mid-August, Craig's truck appeared in the driveway at 11:15 a.m. He and Vanessa went inside. The camera on the front door logged them entering with the access code. The interior cameras, I had not reviewed these because I had not thought to, because I had installed a security system for my parents' safety and not as a monitoring apparatus, showed them moving through the house for nearly 3 hours. The camera in the hallway showed Craig standing in the doorway of the guest room for a long time with his arms crossed, turning slowly, the way a person turns when they are sizing up a space for a different purpose than the one it currently serves. At 2:43 p.m., they left. I did not see any of this until later. What I did notice on a Sunday call in early September was that my mother's crystal wine glasses were on the wrong shelf. I know this because I am the person who unpacked those glasses and put them on the upper left shelf because that's where they'd been for 30 years in the old house, and I thought continuity would matter. My mother mentioned, almost in passing, that Vanessa had reorganized the kitchen a little when she visited. She said it in a tone that was careful in a way that kitchen organization should not require. I said, "Mom, is everything okay?" She said, "Of course." I booked my flight for the following weekend. I landed at Norfolk International on a Friday evening and drove the 40 minutes to the coast in a rental car with the windows down because September on the Virginia coast has a particular quality of air that I have never been able to replicate anywhere else in the country. I stopped at a grocery store, bought my father's brand of instant coffee and my mother's preferred brand of English breakfast tea and a box of the shortbread cookies she pretended not to eat and ate every time. I turned onto the coast road at 6:22 p.m. Craig's truck was in the driveway driveway, and another vehicle I didn't recognize, a rented cargo van, the kind with the sliding side door, parked halfway on the lawn. I sat in the car for a moment, then I got out. The front door was unlocked, unusual, because my parents locked the door at 5 o'clock with the precision of people raised to believe that unlocked doors were an invitation to trouble. I walked in and understood immediately, from the quality of the silence and the arrangement of things, that I had walked into the middle of something. The hallway table had been pushed against the wall. There were cardboard boxes, flaps open, partially packed, stacked along the entry. Moving boxes. Not guest luggage. Moving boxes, with a box tape dispenser sitting on the floor beside them. I heard my mother before I saw her. Not words. Just the particular sound of a person crying with the specific restraint of someone who has been crying for a while and has become self-conscious about it. I followed the sound to the kitchen. She was at the table with a dish towel pressed to her face. She was wearing her good blouse, the blue one she wore for occasions, which made no sense, and which I understood later. She had gotten dressed up because today was supposed to be a celebration of some kind, a family visit, and she had dressed accordingly, and then things had gone wrong, and she was still in the good blouse. My father was standing by the kitchen doorway. His glasses had slid down his nose, which happened when his hands were shaking badly enough that he couldn't manage the small motor task of pushing them back up. They were shaking. He was looking at Craig. Craig was standing in the center of the kitchen with his arms crossed, and behind him, leaning in the archway between the kitchen and the living room, was Vanessa. She had a wine glass in her hand. My mother's crystal. My mother's crystal. I looked at my father. He looked at me. Something passed between us that was not words but was more than silence. I set the grocery bag on the counter. Ethan, Vanessa pushed off from the archway with the particular energy of someone who has been waiting to perform a specific scene. Good. We should all talk. What's happening? I said. Craig unfolded his arms. He had a way of occupying space that expanded when he sensed an audience, and he had sensed one. What's happening is your parents are rattling around in a 4-bedroom house with a guest cottage and too many stairs. We're family. It makes sense for us to be here, to help. Those are moving boxes, I said. Transition boxes, Vanessa said. Mom and Dad would be so much more comfortable in the guest cottage, more manageable, and we need the space. The boys need rooms. Craig needs a home office. This is my house, I said. Craig smiled. That smile, the one that contains an entire worldview. It's your parents' home, he said, and your parents are being very stubborn about what's practical. We're just trying to help them understand the situation. That was when I looked at my mother's wrist. She had moved the dish towel. Her hand was resting on the table, and on her wrist, her right wrist, just above the joint, there was a bruise, shadow-colored, the specific yellow-purple of a bruise that is 3 or 4 days old, the shape and size of fingers. The room restructured itself around that bruise. Everything that had been background became foreground. My father's shaking, my mother in her good blouse crying, the boxes, the cargo van outside. Who are you calling? Craig's voice, sharp and sudden. I had not realized I'd taken my phone out. The police, I said. His face changed. Not dramatically. Craig was good enough at performing to keep the shift small, but it was there. For what? He said, with a laugh. The kind that means this is ridiculous and is calculated to make you feel ridiculous for not seeing how ridiculous it is. Trespassing, I said. Elder intimidation. I looked at my mother's wrist. And whatever they decide after they see Mom's wrist. Vanessa's wine glass hit the counter so hard I was surprised it didn't break. We're family, Ethan. No, I said. I looked at her for a long moment. My sister, who had sat with me through a thunderstorm, who had become someone I did not recognize. Mom and Dad are family. You're an intruder with our last name. I dialed. Officer Darnell Martinez arrived in 12 minutes, with a partner named Officer Yolanda Sims, 7 and 14 years, with the Coastal Precinct, respectively. I want to be specific about this because what happened next is a precise thing, and precision requires accurate details. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. Craig transformed between the moment I ended the call and the moment the officers knocked. The expansion left his posture. His voice dropped to the register of a man wrongly accused, patient and sorrowful, wounded by the misunderstanding. His shoulders went soft. He had, I noted, done this before. This was a practiced performance. Vanessa cried, beautifully. She told Officer Sims that she was simply trying to help her aging parents with a responsible transition, that her brother had never understood family dynamics, that she was being painted as a villain for trying to help. Officer Martinez, a compact man with reading glasses in his breast pocket and the specific quality of attention that comes from years of listening to contradictory accounts of the same events, took in the room without speaking. He looked at the boxes, the van outside, my mother's wrist. Then he asked to see identification and documentation. I handed him 3 things. The copy of the deed, my name only, printed in the clean legal typography of an official property record, no one else. The occupancy agreement Jonathan Marsh had prepared, establishing my parents as protected occupants and specifying in explicit legal language that no third party had right of access or occupancy without the owner's written consent. That was me. No one had my written consent. And the security system access log pulled from the Ring app on my phone, showing that the access code had been changed 2 days prior. Not by me, not by my parents. My father barely used the app, and my mother had asked me to manage it. The log showed the change had been made by a device registered to a name I did not recognize, but cross-referencing the timestamp showed Craig's truck in the driveway at that exact time. Craig stopped performing. He looked at the access log on my phone screen. He looked at me, and I saw the moment a man understands that the architecture he has built is standing on nothing. Officer Martinez turned to my father. My father had been quiet through all of this. He was a quiet man by nature, the kind of quiet that can be mistaken for passivity by people who don't understand the difference between a man choosing not to speak and a man who has nothing to say. His glasses were still on his nose now. He had straightened them when the officers arrived. A small, deliberate composure. "Sir," Officer Martinez said, "can you tell me in your own words what's been happening here?" My father looked at Officer Martinez, looked at Craig, looked at Vanessa, and found his voice. It came out steady, in the way that things sometimes come out steady when the decision to speak has already done the hard work of what it requires. "He grabbed Helen by the wrist," my father said. "4 days ago. She was asking them to please not move her sewing things, and he took her wrist and he told her to stop acting hysterical." A pause. "He told me to stop acting like a man unless I was prepared to be treated like one." The room went absolutely still. Vanessa did not cry this time. Craig looked at the floor. Officer Sims was photographing my mother's wrist with her phone. What followed was not dramatic, in the way that real institutional process is rarely dramatic. It was thorough. That is its own kind of justice. The methodical, documented, step-by-step process of a system functioning as it is supposed to. Officer Martinez asked everyone to find somewhere to sit. Craig, perhaps sensing that the ground had fully disappeared beneath him, attempted one more performance. He talked about a software executive using money as a weapon, about family being pressured into legal frameworks, about what kind of man buys his parents a house to control them. I let him finish. "I bought this house," I said, "so they could wake up to the ocean after 50 years of waking up before sunrise just to survive." Then the front door, which Officer Sims had left partially open, admitted someone none of us had called. Mrs. Patricia Klein, 71 years old, retired librarian, immediate neighbor on the north side, a woman of the specific caliber that produces cardigan sweaters and gardening gloves, and expressions like a very calm blade, appeared in the doorway with a look of determined purpose. "I believe I should speak to someone," she told Officer Martinez. He invited her in. Mrs. Klein had, in the previous 9 days, witnessed 3 separate incidents that she described with the precision of a woman who spent 34 years cataloging information for a living. Craig shouting from the porch on a Tuesday, loud enough to hear from her garden 20 meters away. My father, she knew him by name. They had spoken over the fence several times about the respective merits of coastal gardening, locked outside the front door for 20 minutes on a Thursday, knocking, while voices continued inside. A moved piece of porch furniture that she had initially dismissed and then reconsidered. "I nearly called before," she told the officers. "I should have." Vanessa covered her face with both hands, not crying, just having nowhere else to put her expression. Officer Martinez turned to Craig and Vanessa. He spoke quietly, precisely. He told them that given the allegations of physical intimidation, the documentation of unauthorized access code changes, and the witness corroboration, they would need to gather their essential belongings and vacate the property. Immediately. Officers would remain present to ensure the process was orderly. Craig's voice cracked for the first time. "You're removing a family from a house over, you are being directed to vacate a property where you have no legal right of occupancy," Officer Martinez said, following credible allegations of threats and physical intimidation against the documented residents. He said it the way people say things that are simply true and do not require emphasis. "You're welcome to consult an attorney if you believe this action is improper. That is your right. In the meantime, please gather what you need." Craig stood very still for a moment. Then he went to pack. They packed while Officer Martinez and Officer Sims remained in the house, and what the packing revealed was its own kind of documentation. Vanessa's dresses, 4 of them, a week's worth at minimum, were hanging in my mother's closet. Craig's shaving kit and toiletries were arranged beside my father's sink in the master bathroom, not beside the guest bathroom, not in the hallway, but beside my father's sink, as if the replacement had already been completed, and they were simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. My father's fishing rods, he had 4, bought one at a time over 30 years, each one associated with a specific body of water and a specific memory, had been bundled into a trash bag, not their cases, a trash bag. My mother's quilts. She made quilts. She had made them for 40 years. She had given them to both of us when we left home. Were stacked in bins labeled "Donate" in black marker. Donate. My mother's quilts in donation bins in her own house. My mother saw the bins. She didn't make a sound. She walked over, picked up the top quilt, a double wedding ring pattern in blue and cream that she had made the year my parents were married, pressed it against her chest briefly, and then carried it back to the bedroom. I followed her. She set the quilt on the bed and smoothed it with both hands, the way she had smoothed things my entire life, and she didn't look at me for a moment. "How long?" I asked. She smoothed the edge of the quilt. "It started as a visit," she said. "They came 3 weeks ago. Craig said they'd help us get settled, and then they were just..." She stopped. "I didn't want to worry you. Mom, you work so hard, Ethan." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "I work hard so you don't have to worry about things like this," I said. "That's the whole point of me working hard." She patted my hand. Then we went back to the living room. My father was in the study. I found him standing at the desk, where someone had left a stack of printer paper on top of his Navy box. The wooden box he had kept for as long as I could remember, that contained his service medals and a collection of letters from his time in the Navy and a folded flag from his brother Robert's military funeral. The papers were piled directly on top of the box's open lid, not beside it, on top of it, as if whatever was inside was simply in the way. My father lifted the stack of papers without looking at them and set them on the floor. He reached into the box, lifted the flag. Both hands, the way you hold something that requires that kind of care. He held it for a moment. Then he turned and looked at Craig, who was moving through the hallway with a duffel bag. "You will never speak to my wife again," my father said. Craig stopped. Something in my father's voice had the quality of a thing that does not move. Craig tried a smile, the old instinct reaching for the tool that had always worked. "George, my name," my father said, with the particular quiet of 40 years of grace that has decided to be done being mistaken for something else, "is Mr. Whitaker to you." Craig's smile failed. My father looked at Vanessa. I had never heard him speak to her the way he did then. Not with anger. My father was not by nature an angry man. With exhaustion. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been patient in the faith that patience will eventually be rewarded, and has just understood that some people do not possess the capacity to reward it. "You will not call your mother asking for money," he said. "You will not send the boys to ask for gifts that you should be too ashamed to ask for yourself." He held Vanessa's eyes. "You brought this into our home. That is something you will have to live with." Vanessa looked like a person hearing a language they didn't know existed. By 7:30 in the evening, the cargo van was loaded. Craig did not speak again. He moved with the efficiency of a man who has been stripped of his performance and operates, in its absence, on pure mechanical function. He carried his boxes. He carried Vanessa's dresses on their hangers, draped over his arm. He took his toiletries from beside my father's sink and placed them in a bag without looking at what he was doing. I stood on the porch and watched the van doors close. Jonathan Marsh, my attorney, had been on the phone with me twice during the afternoon. He had, when I called him at 3:15, pulled up the property documents and the occupancy agreement and confirmed that Officer Martinez had everything he needed and had told me to contact him Monday morning to discuss any further legal action. Jonathan had also, quietly, and with the professionalism I had come to rely on, mentioned that if my mother's wrist bruise was formally documented by a physician, which Officer Sims had already recommended, the evidentiary record for a formal elder abuse complaint was strong. I watched the van pull out of the driveway. Vanessa was in the passenger seat. She looked back once. I did not wave. I went inside and found my parents in the kitchen. My father was making instant coffee, the brand I'd bought at the grocery store, which I'd left on the counter, and my mother was sitting at the table with the blue and cream quilt across her lap, running her fingers along the stitching. I sat down across from her. Neither of us said anything for a while. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I should have had better protections in place." My mother looked up. She had the expression she used when she thought I was being unreasonable, which was an expression I had missed and was glad to see. "You bought us the ocean," she said. "That's not a thing to be sorry about. I will tell you what I found out later, because later is when the full shape of things became clear. Craig had lost his job in January after an internal audit revealed 18 months of falsified expense reports, a scheme that had netted him approximately $41,000 that his employer's lawyers were now attempting to recover through civil proceedings. Vanessa's online home decor business, which she had been documenting exhaustively on social media for 3 years, turned out to be 70% staged photography and 30% products she had purchased with credit cards that were now collectively maxed at just under $30,000. The house they owned in New Jersey was 6 weeks from foreclosure. They had not come for a visit. They had come for a rescue. Specifically, the kind of rescue that involves occupying a space long enough, applying enough social and familial familial pressure, and making the people being pressured uncomfortable enough in their own home that they would agree to a transfer, to sign over, or to pressure me to restructure the property in a way that would solve the Daltons' problems at everyone else's expense. The plan, as best as I could reconstruct it, had been elegant in its cynicism. Establish occupancy, move my parents to the guest cottage under the guise of practicality, then leverage my parents' reluctance to cause family conflict into a gradual fait accompli. They expected my parents to be too gentle to fight. They expected me to be too guilty about money, or too conflict-averse, or too something to push back. Craig had gotten impatient. He had grabbed my mother's wrist 3 days earlier than was operationally advisable, if operational is a word you can use about a plan this shabby. He had grabbed my mother's wrist. He had walked into a house where his name appeared on nothing. He had told the man who owned it to leave. These were mistakes that compounded each other in the way of all plans built on the assumption that the people around you are smaller than they are. 6 months later, a formal elder abuse complaint was filed the following Monday, based on Officer Sims's documentation and a medical assessment of my mother's wrist conducted by Dr. Lauren Osee at the Coastal Urgent Care Clinic. 12 years in family medicine, who documented the bruising as consistent with forcible gripping and whose report became Exhibit A in a complaint that the county DA's office reviewed for potential misdemeanor elder intimidation charges. Craig's attorney, a man named Philip Gerard, who apparently also handled the expense report litigation and therefore had a very full autumn, negotiated a resolution that included a formal no-contact order covering both my parents, enforceable for 3 years. Craig did not see the inside of a courtroom, which I have some feelings about, but my father said he didn't want the boys to see it, and my father's preference carries more weight than my feelings. Vanessa has not called. Not once. In 6 months. I don't know whether that is shame or strategy or something else entirely. I have not called her. I think about the person she was at 7 years old sitting with me through a thunderstorm, and I hold on to that person as a separate thing from who she became because it seems important to remember that people contain both. The New Jersey house went to foreclosure in November. I know this because I looked it up. I am not proud of looking it up, but I looked it up. My parents have settled into the house in the way of people who have spent 50 years not quite believing they deserved something beautiful, learning gradually that they do. My father has a rocking chair on the back porch and his fishing rods in the garage, properly stored this time, in their cases. My mother has a garden bed along the south wall that is coming in better than she expected. She made a new quilt. She started it the week after the Daltons left, the specific kind of project a person starts when they need to reclaim something, and finished it in 8 weeks, which for my mother is very fast. She hung it on the wall of the living room. It faces the ocean window. I was there for Thanksgiving. My father made coffee at 6 in the morning, and we sat on the porch in our coats in the cold, clear November air and watched the water. He looked like a man who had been somewhere difficult and was now, carefully and genuinely, somewhere else. "Thank you, Ethan," he said. "For what?" He thought about it. "For knowing what we needed before we said it." I looked at the ocean. It looked back, the way the ocean does. Patient, indifferent, enormously old, entirely unconcerned with the small human dramas enacted on its shores. "That's what you both always did for me," I said. He nodded once. We finished our coffee. The sun came up over the water the way it does every morning on that porch, and my parents were right there to see it, because that was always the whole point.